The power of role models cannot be underestimated. As Michelle Obama and the founder of Girls Who Code said, "You can't be what you can't see." So here we are, and the idea of a photo exhibition has become much more. Today we are launching an organization, Women on the Map, which will encourage women and girls to share their journeys of how their own ideas and their dreams led to their accomplishments, and to taking a seat at the table where decisions are made. It's important to note that in the Walsh School of Foreign Service, there have been many pioneers of advancing women in international affairs, dating back to the late 70s and early 80s, when under the deanship of Peter Crow, they created the Women and Foreign Service program to appoint to the faculty a prominent woman who would be responsible for not only teaching core curriculum in the school, but also to acting as a role model to the female students. This woman is familiar to many of us in the room. That woman was Madeleine Albright. I am told that she invited women professionals in foreign affairs to the university to meet with the women students. This led to what economists call the demonstration effect. Many of these female students went on to become trailblazers in their respective fields. And Madeleine Albright also took her own advice and became the US ambassador to the United Nations and the first female Secretary of State. I would also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the late Carol Lancaster, the former Dean of the School of Foreign Service, who was a pioneering woman in international affairs, who broke through glass ceilings and empowered new generations of women to take on roles that were traditionally held by men. As one visiting professor said, she showed that a woman executive and thinker could be as tough-minded and demanding as any man. And tonight's program centers on the role of technology and how we can increase participation in STEM and careers of global impact, both of which are target indicators of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality. Tonight's program would not be possible without Georgetown Women's Alliance, Georgetown Global Engagement, the Giulietta New Media Center, the School of Foreign Service Graduate Career Center, and the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a champion for women's advancement on campus, Tom Banshoff, the Vice President for Global Engagement. Dr. Banshoff serves as founding director of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and as professor in the Department of Government and the School of Foreign Service. So please join me in welcoming Professor Thomas Banshoff.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Zoe, for the kind introduction and for all you do for Georgetown, continue to do for Georgetown. As we all know already, you and your team have put together an excellent event this evening, part of a series of events we hope will extend far into the future. On a critically important set of topics tonight, our focus is that intersection between technology and women's empowerment. I'm glad to be a part of it. I'm glad it's here at Georgetown, under the leadership not just of Women on the Map, but also the Georgetown Women's Alliance. So, just seeing if those photos are behind me. I know they're out in the hall. Really an amazing photo exhibit. A Hall of Fame, really, of extraordinary Georgetown women. I want to thank the Women's Alliance for donating these photos and featuring them here, where we can see faces, many of them familiar to me, including dear friend Carol Lancaster, who was already mentioned, but also some less familiar faces, and all great women who have made Georgetown the institution it is today. One of the best things about tonight's events is its passion and its origins in the activism of our students. Women on the Map, as you know, is an effort to advance women to reach their full potential as global leaders. It really goes back to the initiative, the creativity, and the drive of Zoe and other impressive players in including Jillian Doon, Fadia, Tula, and Rashid Hamdan. Jillian and Fadia, you're also here today. Why don't you raise your hands? Let's give them all a round of applause. Rashid is abroad, and we're not live casting this, right? So you don't have to recognize it, but it's a great effort that's ongoing. The question of how technology can empower women and girls is, of course, a complex, multifaceted one. So I think it's fitting that tonight's event approaches it from different directions. We've got a photo exhibit, a panel discussion, and a virtual reality experience made possible by the Gillardin New Media Center at our Lallinger Library, one of the wonderful resources here at Georgetown. Before I turn it over to my colleague Lisa, who will introduce the program in more detail, I did want to say a few words about the importance of this empowerment agenda for Georgetown. We are, as I hope you all know, an institution out of our Jesuit tradition committed to social justice. Now, over the past several decades, and unfortunately not before, gender equality, gender justice has emerged and is emerging as a central concern in our research, in our teaching, and in our outreach and service to the world. As many of you know, Georgetown is one of the United Nations 10 educational partners for the UN's He for She initiative. We are home, of course, to the Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and to a new gender justice initiative, which is holding its second colloquium this Friday. And we've long had a flourishing women and gender studies program. I see our gathering tonight as part of this larger institutional movement. We're all a part of it. Georgetown's institutional commitment to the principle of women's equality and empowerment, and to the deeper realization of that principle in practice. So thank you all for being here with us this evening. And now I am happy to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Krim, Senior Advisor to the President for Faculty Relations, a valued colleague for many years who wears many different hats at Georgetown. Tonight, most important, as has been mentioned, is her role, her leading role as chair of Georgetown's Women's Alliance, one of the sponsors for our gathering. So please join me in welcoming Lisa and thanking her for her leadership.
Thank you, and thank you, Tom. Thank you for being here to help us kick the day off. It really is both a privilege and a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Georgetown Women's Alliance and for us to co-sponsor tonight's event with Women on the Map. The Georgetown Women's Alliance was formed 3 years ago to foster an environment where women can learn, grow, and thrive, and to amplify the work of the many groups and people all around Georgetown who are working to advance this goal. Tonight's event really exemplifies that mission. Zoe came to us as a student with a seed of an idea, and thanks to her vision, persistence, and commitment, and in partnership with GWA's programming chairs, Erica Coluder and Chantal Pinkney, it is thrilling to see tonight's event come to fruition. We're excited to have an amazing panel of women, including several Hoyas, who are here tonight to explore the question, how can technology empower women and girls? Gender diversity in technology is critical. Even though information technology is one of the fastest growing industries in America, fewer women today are pursuing computer science degrees than 30 years ago. For women to play a leading role in the global economy, we've got to address this gender gap. And we've got to focus on the pipeline. As Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg said, we need women at all levels, including at the top, to change the dynamic, to reshape the conversation, and to make sure that women's voices are heeded and heard, not overlooked and ignored. Today's panel will explore the transformative role technology plays in women's lives and how we can support women throughout the pipeline. It's my honor to introduce Gwen Young, the moderator of today's panel. So Gwen K. Young is the director of the Global Women's Leadership Initiative and Women in Public Service Project at the Wilson Center. She brings to her position over 20 years of experience in international public service. As a public policy professional, Young has advocated for and published on the role girls and women play in political, social, and economic development. She's trained women in advocacy skills, how to build a network, and management skills. Young has also worked on the ground with private sector and public service actors on issues of women's entrepreneurship, including tools to ensure access to finance. As an attorney, Young has worked as a professional advocate for women and human rights in corporate law settings with the ICTY and the Koch Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego. She also has provided humanitarian law and advocacy training and developed guidelines to deal with sexual and gender-based violence and exploitation in conflicted zones. Her career has encompassed a comprehensive array of international organizations, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Médecins Sans Frontières, International Rescue Committee, and the Harvard Institute for International Development. An alumna of Smith College, Harvard, and the UC Davis Martin Luther King Jr. School of Law, Young has pursued a career in humanitarian relief, international development, and human rights. Please join me in welcoming her to Georgetown as tonight's moderator and to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Zoe and Tom. And on behalf of the Woodrow Wilson Center, thank you to Women on the Map and the Georgetown Women's Alliance for tonight. I think it's going to be an incredibly exciting lineup. This is an important partnership for these organizations that share similar missions. So I head the Global Women's Leadership Initiative and the Women in Public Service Project at the Wilson Center. Of course, you have to have two projects for women's empowerment. But we have a really simple mission that by 2050, we want to ensure that 50% of government leadership positions are held by women across the globe. And I want to say that before we launch into tonight's discussion, our goal is government leadership. So it's not just the president of the country, right, or a member of parliament, but it's all government positions in the civil sector, in the judiciary, in national security, and it's all positions. And there are positions today that did not exist 20 years ago in the government. So in the same way that women in technology, I think women in public service is an incredibly important piece. And we'll talk about this because we have some distinguished experts on our panel. So I'm really, really happy to introduce, and in the interest of getting us to the activities and the exciting things afterwards, I will call up our panelists. First, we have Rila Bailey Galvis, who is head of international policy at Google and a Georgetown alum. So welcome, Rila. Lisa Singh, who's the Associate Professor in the Department of Computer Science and the co-founder of Georgetown University Women Who Code. Welcome, Professor Singh. Prachi Vakaria, who is the Managing Director of Lumanium, which she will talk about later, and also works at the World Bank on transportation and technology issues. And Victoria Espinel, who's the President of Software.org, the BSA Foundation. Welcome, Victoria. So as the women come up to the stage and are thinking and getting ready for the discussion, I want to talk about a few themes that we're going to speak to tonight. I call it, as opposed to STEM, I call it science, technology, and innovation. Because I think science and technology is a way to open new jobs, creative solutions, creativity, and inclusion. So I want to really talk about those, and I want to have you guys as the experts talk about what the role innovation played. But I'm a person of stats, and as Lisa mentioned, it's not looking so good out there. So I'm going to start with a couple of stats. Only 3% of female students consider a career in technology today. Very different than 30 years ago, but still very low numbers. Now, only 50% of professional occupations are held by women. And I can tell you the globally CEOs are in the 13 to 14% that are women. And board chairs, 3 to 4%. So very, very low numbers. But if you go into the professional computing sector, only 26% of the workforce is women. So there are these large gaps. So I'm going to start to my left. What can be done to address this gender equality at the intersection of technology, public policy, and innovation? What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And that is a huge question. I think that is the overarching question, and the most fundamental thing that starts with is access to the internet and being able to get digital skills so you can take advantage of being on the internet. We know that women are 50% less likely to have internet access than men, and even when they do have that access, women are 1.6 times more likely to not have the skills necessary to use the internet for education or to use internet for their own business or start their own business. So not only that, but women do not want to go online because they experience higher rates of being harassed. So I think that's a fundamental thing that we have to address. That's something that Google is working on, a lot of wonderful NGOs and foundations, and that's just the very beginning. And of course, then there's digital skills training for entrepreneurs and kids, and I can give examples of that a little later on.
Great. Victoria, I know you've done some research on this, and you call it the technology landscape. What does it look like for women out there today?
So this is an area we are definitely failing. I think one of the things that's really interesting is if you look at if you look at the progress of women in computer science, we are actually going backwards compared to where we were in the 1980s. So in the 1980s, 34% of computer science graduates were female. And that was roughly comparable with where we were in law and medicine. About a third of law, medicine, and computer science graduates were female. In the intervening time, since the 1980s, law and medicine have caught up. And now law and medicine graduates are roughly 50, women I think are 51%, but it's essentially proportional to the population. Whereas in computer science, it was 34% in the 1980s, we have now gone back to 18%. So we have even fewer women going to computer science, and it's a real problem for the industry, both in terms of a labor shortage problem that we have, but also in terms of making sure that we have the right people at the table as we're designing software. So it's a big problem. I think a little bit of what we're going to talk about today is what can be done to try to address it, because it's not just an area where we need to make further progress, it's an area where we are actually going backwards, so we need to break that cycle and then figure out how to move forward from there.
Focus on the problem for a second. Professor Singh, what are you seeing? What are students saying as you're speaking to them today?
So I think it's interesting that most people view us as going backwards. I'm actually going to make a claim that we're starting to go forwards. Barely, but we're starting to. It's become very clear that women are not at the table, that women are not interested in computer science, and a number of organizations have now started to emerge. Girls Who Code, other organizations like that, and we have coding organizations here. But I think fundamentally what people are realizing is by the time girls are in middle school, they've made a decision that they don't care for certain fields. So if we're going to address this in the classroom, we have to address it before you get to college. By the time they get to college, I can only influence them so much. If they don't come to see me, if they're not in classes that are more technology driven, they may never go into classes that are more technology driven. So this is a problem that starts earlier, and we have to address it earlier. And the other big thing that I think is really important is women are scared of coding because they don't understand it. Once they get exposed to it, they actually have fun and enjoy it and think it's awesome. So we need to find a way to engage more women in simple coding projects so that they'll feel comfortable enough to learn more advanced skills.
I recently was in Silicon Valley for a competition for young girls globally of their apps.
Yeah.
And they were saying after 110 hours of coding a year, and a professor at their high school, amazing apps, a dementia app, for example, they were inspired. And they were like, this is what we want to do, and we want to be entrepreneurs. And I'm going to turn to you, Prati, and want to tell us a bit about Womananium and the entrepreneurship piece of this, because I think this is what you're trying to derive, but entrepreneurship in science and technology.
Absolutely, thank you. So my counterpart from co-panelists from Google specified the digital age, but what women really have forgotten is that it's the first industrial revolution that brought about the feminine consciousness. When women were working in factory jobs, that's when they realized that for the amount of output that they're creating, they deserve the same pay as a man creating the same amount of output. And this is what led to the feminist consciousness to begin with. So not just focusing on the digital side, but focusing on science and technology. That's something that's really missing from the conversation in most places. And this is why we started Womanium. Womanium is not focused on coding. Other organizations are already doing such an excellent job of it. We are modeled after agencies like DARPA and ARPA, in the sense we ask them fundamental questions, which is what has not been done before. And the other is we focus on high technology, so really advanced scientific programs. So Women was modeled after agencies like ARPA and DARPA, where we focus on making advanced scientific programs with agencies like NIH, so I have a colleague from NIH present here, NASA, ARPA, DARPA, etc., as well as various companies including Qualcomm, Amazon, etc., to make, again, advanced scientific programs, to bring more women into the realm of science, but especially those women at the edge of the bell curve, so women who are already quite advanced in these fields, but giving them that push and making them know what's at the cutting edge of science. Because if women have to be the leaders of tomorrow, you have to know what are the technologies of tomorrow as well. And that is the focus of Women.
So how are we increasing the exposure? I mean, technology, new types of jobs, entrepreneurship. I know, Google, you talked about some opportunities. How are we making young girls aware? How are we making girls in college aware? How are they being exposed to this? You want to take a stab?
Yeah, well, we've already had a few mention the coding workshops, and I think that those are really great to expose kids at a young age. I've actually was lucky enough to volunteer with one called CS First with Google, and they go around to grade schools and teach a very basic Scratch coding program, which is essentially like putting puzzle pieces together. But it's teaching the fundamentals of coding and kind of the logic thought process that goes through when you put it together. And it was incredible to see. I mean, this was a mixed group, but the girls were really the ones who were the most excited about the challenges that they were facing, and it was so cool to just see how into it they were, and they were very young, and this is a great example of something to get their interest piqued. They could go home, use this free app Scratch, or there's many other versions of that out there, and they can start talking about it and then see that there is a woman who's teaching them and get more and more interested.
Any other thoughts on some best practices on how we're getting the exposure, getting the interest into either the career or the studies?
So I think there's three things we need to do. I think first is dispelling stereotypes. Second is education, and third is a commitment from the top of the companies, because I think that's really necessary. Things are going to change, and the first two are sort of fundamental prerequisites. I think coding. So my organization, we were the sponsors of the DC launch of Girls Who Code. I think it's a great organization. I think it does really good work in terms of dispelling stereotypes. It purposely finds women or young girls who have not had exposure to coding, brings them into the class. A lot of them come in nervous either because their families aren't super supportive of them being there, or nervous because they've never had any exposure to coding before. But I think being in the class, like that reality is more than anything else, that is what will help dispel stereotypes. Part of it is also looking for role models and trying to point girls towards them and expose them to them, because if you see someone in a field, it immediately makes it much more concretely possible to you that that's a field that you can go into. But on the education piece, I would say, as much as I think Girls Who Code is a great organization, and we've seen it do really wonderful things, I think we also need to look at a more fundamental reform of our educational system, and have it not just in after-school classes and in coding camps, which are fantastic, but also start building it into the actual curriculum of schools, so that young children, male and female, are both have the opportunity to be exposed at a young age and see that that's a viable choice for them if it's something that they want.
Let's switch gears a bit. We've talked about why it's important to get sort of young girls into this. Actually, why is this important? Why is it important that women are in technology? What is the importance of that, both in terms of outcomes, why is that important in society, but also more women, the assumption is more women at the table, reduction in gender inequality. Can you speak to that? Is that really what's going to happen as well?
Well, what we're anticipating with automation is this fourth industrial revolution. And what that means is with more and more automated jobs, be it in any sort of field, we are going to see women are twice as likely to lose their job as men. So now it's even more imperative that women obtain the skills that are going to be the skills that the future workforces are going to be needing. And that means training the workforce, so women who are graduating right now or in school right now, but also retraining programs for women who are already in industry, where the skills will no longer be valid. So it's a really, really important question to ask. What are the skills that we need for tomorrow? And for that, fundamental understanding of science is going to be very, very important. Even if you think of computer science, a lot of people are talking of coding, but computer science still, it's a fundamental understanding of things like mathematics and logic that's going to be important in informing what languages to learn. And despite, there are programming languages from scratch to Swift to a different programming language coming out every year or so. But if you know the essentials, if you know the fundamentals, it doesn't matter what language is going to be new in the market. As long as you know the fundamentals, you'll be on top of the game. And that is the focus of Womanium, but also what's going to be most important for women as the workforce is going to change, as we have this fourth industrial revolution.
So let me add on to that. So in the software industry, we are in the somewhat unusual position of having more jobs to offer than we can fill. We support 10 million jobs in the United States, and that number would be higher if we could fill all the jobs that we have. So we have a real labor shortage issue, and so for that reason, we have a real interest in seeing more young people go into computer science of all genders. But I think it is also very important that we specifically be encouraging more young girls to go into computer science, and this is why. First, I think it will make the software better. I am firmly convinced that if we have more women coders, more women computer scientists, the software is going to be more innovative, it's going to be more creative, it's going to be more secure. So I think it will make the software that our companies are developing better if there are more women involved in the process. Second, software is having such an enormous impact on how we live our lives every single day, how we interact with our family, how we interact with our friends. It has an enormous impact on not just the economy of the US, but the economy of the world. And I think when you have a technology that is fundamentally changing the world, changing our economy, and changing our society, it's really important that you have as many different perspectives involved in the designing of that technology from the outset as possible. So gender, economic opportunity, I think we need to have as diverse range of backgrounds as we can possibly have, not just because it will make it better, but because it's having such a big impact. And I think unless you bring that range of perspectives, you could, I think you run the risk of it not, either not fulfilling the potential it should have, or potentially going in a direction that is unhelpful. So both because I think it will one, we need more coders, but I think it will make the software better if more of them are female. And I think because of the impact that the industry, that software is having on society, we really need to have that range of perspectives at the table during the design process.
Yeah, I think fundamentally one thing we need to think about is just literacy. We think about reading in terms of literacy, we think about mathematics in terms of literacy, but we've reached a time and a period where we really need to think about computing literacy and algorithmic thinking literacy. And this isn't just a nice to have anymore. We're a society right now of people who understand the devices that they use and how they work, and people who just use them. And if you just use them and you don't understand how it works or the thinking behind it, you're actually illiterate in this new economy. And so it's really imperative that whether you're a computer scientist or not, that you actually understand the fundamentals of algorithmic thinking so that you can be party to the conversations, even if they're not the coding conversations.
Which leads me to the question sort of like, what would be the key skills needed and how are you going to improve that sort of literacy piece? And as Prachi said, technology is changing rapidly. So what are the skills, like if you were advising people that you need in order to develop that literacy and be able to keep up? Because on the flip side, I was just at a lecture a couple weeks ago saying, the youth of today are now creating their own jobs. They're crowdsourcing jobs, they're creating these opportunities. Yet we have a shortage over here in software, but what are the skills that you need to get that literacy and to keep up with that ever-changing environment?
Well, I really like this idea of literacy, not necessarily 100% competency, because I've seen that true in my own experience working for a tech company, but not coming from a CS background. So I think while at Georgetown, I was able to get a really great exposure to a lot of analytical methods, whether it be economics or other mathematic ways of analyzing issues. And that was one of the main things that allowed me to work for a tech company, was to be able to work with an engineer who's coding Python. And I personally can't code Python, but I can talk with him about it, and I know the theories that he's talking about. So I found that very helpful, and if you don't find that you get that in your classes, there's tons of places where you can go and get those types of courses, little extra methodological skill sets elsewhere as well.
So I would argue that the basis of computer science is algorithmic thinking, and it is a different way of thinking. It's a different way of problem solving. There are standard ways that you learn in mathematics and in other disciplines, but it's a very different way of thinking. So if you can manage to take a course on how to look at problems from an algorithmic perspective, I think that can be a really great way to learn what computer scientists are thinking about when they develop code and programming skills.
Does this go to the overhaul of the education system you were talking about?
Yes, it does. But I was going to make a different point, which I think the specific skills you need, probably they're going to vary depending on what profession you go in. But I just want to underscore the point that I think it is so important today, and I will use this as an opportunity to give a shout out to Georgetown Law School. So Georgetown Law School now has a class for coding for lawyers, and I actually think it's really important. I'm a lawyer by background. I think it's really important if you're a lawyer today to have some basic level of literacy about technology. Not necessarily that you need yourself to be a computer science engineer, but you need to understand the implications, you need to understand some of the policy and other and legal implications coming from technology. So I think it's great that Georgetown Law School has embraced that. I did 2 stints of public service, and I think it would be really helpful if more people in public policy had more of a background in technology. And again, they shouldn't all be computer scientists, but having a general level of competency or literacy on what the implications of technology are, how it's used, the impacts it's going to have on the economy and our society are really important. And so, that's a different skill set if you're a public servant versus a lawyer versus a computer scientist versus someone in manufacturing who, as an example of an industry that is being transformed by technology and that process is going to continue, I think the specific skill set will change. But I think it's hard to think of, for me, to think of any career right now where having some basic level of competency or literacy won't be helpful in how you do your job.
Yeah, and what I found is just basic science literacy is really, really, really important. Some of my mentors come from ARPA-E. So ARPA-E is Advanced Research Projects Agency under the Department of Energy, and they fund cutting-edge energy innovations. So everything from battery technology to nuclear fusion to a whole range of technologies. And they do really exciting work. It's quite cutting edge. And still, when companies come to them or universities come to them, approach them for funding, the basic fundamental question they ask, it's not related to technology, it's related to physics. They ask, does it meet the laws of thermodynamics? Does it fulfill any of these? And does it break any of these laws? And if it does, then they refuse to fund it. So again, knowing that basic science is something that's going to inform all the careers of the future. And this basic science literacy should be there in every individual, man or woman, and definitely for the workforce of tomorrow.
Absolutely. I like the link with the public policy professionals sort of having, I'll say, a clue about it. We at the Wilson Center do some cybersecurity training with members of staff on the Hill, and the notion of they're drafting this legislation that's going to impact areas that they may or may not know. And I started law school when the internet started, and we had lots of discussions about should you regulate it, but no discussions about what was behind it. Before I turn it over to the audience, I do want to shift gears a bit, going to sort of digital inclusion, this notion of access to finance, mobile money. There's a whole variety of things that people are claiming are sort of helping with gender equity. And I'd love to get all of your thoughts, and maybe start with you, Ria, on this sort of digital inclusion, and what is that doing for women's empowerment generally?
Yeah, I do think digital inclusion, access to the economy is one of the biggest benefits that women have from having access online, being able to join this digital workforce. And that's so key because it allows women to be empowered in regions, and especially in regions where societally they might not have the same amount of access to education or credit or skills training as men. In the real world, they can find it online and they can access it and achieve just as much. And so I think this is an equalizer and a democratizing force in the best of cases. So we have to work to ensure that policies allow that to flourish and really occur in real life.
I was thinking perhaps talk about some of the access to either the mobile phone or the internet that's going to give you that technology.
Yeah, so right now, in terms of financial ability, 1 in 3 women don't have monitor their own finances. So that's, or no, do monitor their own finances. So that's horrible. And I think it does, now that technology is more available, it will give women the opportunity to access financial units and other types of technologies. But I'm not sure that's enough, because I don't think they know how to use it. And I think this becomes another literacy issue, particularly in areas of the world where they aren't well educated and they don't even know to look for it. And so this idea of empowering women to even know what they should be looking for is really, really important in many parts of the world. Here, we can educate women that they should know certain things, and we can try to educate our students, and hopefully they will educate their friends and so on. But in many, many parts of the world, we aren't anywhere close to that. And so that's concerning. The technology's there, but it's not there for them yet.
Absolutely. Prachi, what are your thoughts on this?
I think technology itself is agnostic. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Technology is technology. But what can really help women's inclusion in some of the new financial technologies is simply more women designing some of the systems. And as more women are designing it, when you design something, you think of your own use case as well. And if you have more women designing systems, then they will can also possibly design systems that are more accessible or focused towards some of the needs of women as well that are currently being ignored. So I'll definitely just encourage women to participate in these new technologies.
Victoria, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think what's happening in the mobile payment space is really exciting, perhaps particularly in other markets where they're essentially leapfrogging over a whole financial infrastructure to be, and candidly, what may end up being a much more efficient place than we are in the United States. So I think that's really exciting. I think another area of inclusion, which you may see play out even in the United States, is that technology, one of the things technology do is it can let you work in a much more, it can let you work from anywhere, essentially. And so that would probably be a benefit to many people, but it may be disproportionately a benefit to women, and that it allows them to be able to take jobs in many different parts of the country from their homes. And so I think that's just starting to play out, but I have a lot of optimism about that.
Yeah. Flexible with working hours, especially the young hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading that they were saying for women that careers in technology, it's flexibility, generally more money, which will come in a second, fair amount of jobs, as you were bringing up, and this notion of sort of creativity. So we've got 3 women here and potentially 4 who have worked in private companies. So how, you don't want to start with Google, maybe we'll start at the other end of the table, but how can the companies you work for, how can the private sector increase those opportunities? And Victoria says in the software industry, there's a fair amount. Some of it is perception, that I don't belong there, there's a culture problem. What can companies do to encourage women?
So, I think many companies right now are supporting educational opportunities like Girls Who Code, for example. I think companies should continue to do that and do more. Although I think there's a big government piece there as well. And then, as I said, I think there's a real commitment from the top issue. And you can, some companies I think have really embraced that. It's become very clear that the CEO and the senior leadership team have decided this is something that needs to change inside the company, and made that clear down through the chain, and you start to see the ripple effects of that. And I think that's a commitment that every company should embrace.
Kathy?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are embracing and realizing that they need to have more women in technology. For Dominion, for example, we are partnering with the private sector, where we are placing young women in various different companies at the very onset as well. So for internships or extension opportunities, so as companies have told me that when they look to hire, they throw a stone at candidates, most likely it's going to fall on a man. But through the programs we're creating, where they can start placing young women from the very onset, again, as I mentioned, they're able to realize that there are qualified women as well that are in the field and diversify their workforce. So I think
that
companies
exposure
are
by getting them
realizing
into
that.
entry level or into
Exactly.
just getting them in there.
Exactly, yeah. Getting them in there, getting them through the door is something that companies are trying to do and should definitely accelerate.
Professor Singh is undergraduate and graduate school advisor roles.
And I have been in industry as well. So I think actually one of the largest problems that women have, and particularly in technical fields, is they lack confidence. Even though they're as skilled as their male counterparts, they will always focus on the things they don't know as well instead of emphasizing the things that they know well. And because of that, they're promoted less. And so I think companies should actually take the gender differences into account when they're thinking about performance evaluations and promotions, because while women may get in the door through all these different initiatives, women are not going to progress through the company to the CEO level and so forth if they don't get opportunities throughout.
And how can the company help that?
I think we have to look, I think, well, role models and mentors are always important, but I think there's also needs to be an understanding that how men and women react in different situations and handle different situations might be different, and that's okay. The question is, how skilled are they at what they're doing, as opposed to what they're talking about. And I think that's something that you have to notice. Even you can take course evaluations. Okay, you will find that on course evaluations, students will say that male professors are more knowledgeable than female professors. And this is kind of across the board that they'll do that. Whether that's the case or not, it's the way that females present themselves, or what how men or women perceive females present. Right. So,
Absolutely, Ria?
So the way Google approaches this is kind of two-pronged. Something that's already been mentioned is increasing the pipeline of women and girls who are interested in these types of jobs. So that includes, of course, training programs, fellowships, internships that are specifically aimed at women and technical women. But then there's also the issue of supporting women within Google who already work there, and I think that's the bigger, tougher question actually at this point. So what they do is they have an internal women group, and I think actually I'm in a pretty lucky position because the legalpolicy.org, which is the philanthropic side of Google section, actually has parity 50-50 in the sexes, which is incredible. But of course we don't see that across Google, and especially not in the tech part of the business. So there's a huge, we still have much more to go in terms of increasing the amount of women that work in Google and work at big tech companies, and I think you really hit the biggest issue that I would bring up, and I've personally experienced, is the rise of women throughout the ranks that becomes a much slower pace than you see, and then you end up seeing many more men at the top in management.
Yeah, it's working on that sort of recruitment, promotion, and recognizing it. One thing you said about the comfort level, they talk a lot about diversity, is that it's not always comfortable to have the diversity in the room, but that doesn't mean it's a negative, right? It can be a positive. Let's turn it open to the end. I think we've covered kind of a wide swath of topics. I believe there are microphones floating around. I'm not sure who holds them, but why don't we raise your hand? And I'll take the Wilson Center prerogative where we say, please identify yourself, but make it short. Go up at the end with an inflection and make it a question, please, so that we can get everybody's comments and questions answered.
Thank you very much. My name is Rosie O'Neill. I'm the Deputy Director of the Land-Agri Program, one of Zoe's academic centers. I have a question about the way in which we think about the recruitment through the education pipeline. I posed the same question to a group of Northern Virginia technology leaders about a week ago. When they presented the jobs, they talked about the excitement about working in teams. And I'm curious about that message, because that is not the message that we get about careers in this space. We hear about it in the academic world, but we don't necessarily message that. So I'm wondering about organizations like Posse. Since 1989, they've been successful in creating more diversity through this cohort focus into education institutions, or the way that we recruit veterans. But we don't approach the recruitment through this cohort experience. So I'm wondering about what your insights are about recruiting a cohort to support an entire group of women coming into this space.
Who wants to grab that?
I'll try. So I think actually it's a fabulous idea. I think the idea of teams is huge in computer science. Everything is team driven. It's not individual in any way. And in fact, there's been a shift in computer science curriculum to ensure that when you do get a computer science degree, that there's a certain fraction of your coursework that is team-driven as well, because that is the experience that you get when you go into industry. And that came from a lot of alumni coming back to our program and other programs and saying that was something that was lacking. So I think that's important. I think what makes computer science tricky when you're looking at it from a team perspective is that you need these individual skills to have a certain strength. You need to have strength in these skills. So you have to have those, and then you have to get to the team component. And the team component, everybody brings something different, but you can't get to that part till you have this individual level first and this understanding first. So I would agree with you that from a recruiting perspective, showing students that these are teams of people working on projects and actually connecting those projects to public service, community-driven projects, or to things that women care about would actually really help women consider this a good profession.
Does that happen on the career? Does it, you're gonna work as a part of the team, you're gonna be creative, you're gonna feed back into society? How does that happen?
Well, it does something. So actually what this made me think of is I know at least some companies have started looking at their job descriptions and having outside consultants and others come in to give them advice about whether or not they're using language in the job description itself that without meaning to is turning off certain kinds of candidates or basically not so much that they're attracting the wrong candidates, but that they are turning off, including specifically female candidates, but because they're using words that are interpreted in a different way. So when you were asking your question, what I thought was interesting is you said, we don't hear about these jobs in this context. And so I think, and it reminded me of this project that I know a few of the companies are going through where they feel like the job descriptions that they're putting out there are not actually either describing the jobs in a way that would make them as appealing as they could be, or sometimes actually using language that they're finding is an impediment to women considering them. And so I think it's great they're kind of going through that scrub. In terms of recruiting, there's also a lot that's happening right now, interesting, in the artificial intelligence space, and whether or not AI is something that could be used to actually try to eliminate some of the implicit unconscious bias in hiring decisions. There are at least 4 or 5 startups that are in the space that I know of. There may be even more. And I think it is, artificial intelligence, you made the point that technology is neutral. And so I think there's concern that artificial intelligence can be used to exacerbate discrimination. I think there's also a lot of potential for it to eliminate discrimination. And we're at a point now where the technology is so early, it hasn't clearly gone in one way or the other. So I think one thing that we should try to do from a policy perspective is try to make sure that all the incentives and the encouragement are there and try to ensure that artificial intelligence is used to try to fix some societal problems we have, like, for example, trying to uncover instances of unconscious bias and then correct for them. And there's a lot of exciting things that are happening there right now.
It's an experiment with the orchestras where the number of women went up by 30% when they put the curtain down and you took your shoes off. So they didn't know who was playing, what sex the person was, and the number of women in orchestras went up by 30%.
So the shoe off is a really important part of that, because the first time they tried it, it didn't change the numbers at all. And they put the screen and they couldn't understand why. And I give them a lot of credit that instead of saying like, oh, okay, well, I guess we were wrong, they said maybe there was a flawed methodology to the test and they tried it again, because what they found is even with the screen, the tapping of the shoe was enough of an unconscious signal of whether or not it was a male or female behind the screen that it affected the test results. So they had to put down the screen and have people take their shoes off.
Shows you how deep unconscious bias
Yeah,
goes.
exactly.
Amazing, isn't it? We've got a question back here.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you all very
Good afternoon, and thank you all very much for this incredible information. My name is Conchita Sarnoff, and I'm the Executive Director of Alliance to Rescue Victims of Trafficking. The question is directed to mostly Ms. Galvis and Ms. Espinel, but of course everyone can join in, because maybe it's a bit of out of the road question, but it's an important question given the technology and what is going on in the field of human trafficking. Most of the children today being trafficked for sex, labor, or organs are actually trafficked online. And given the arrests, I'm sure you're aware of, and the recent reports of everyone involved, I'm not going to name the corporations, but I would like to know what exactly, not only in terms of public policy outreach, but in terms of corporate support, is Google giving to help and prevent and prosecute traffickers and protect the victims? Thank you.
Absolutely. So I work here in DC in our public policy office, and we have a few people who are dedicated pretty much to this issue, and they work on it every day to interact with community workers and also government workers who work on this issue. So I know it's very dear to their heart. I am not one of those people, but I will try to speak for them as well as I can. Of course, this is a type of content or use of our platforms that is not in line with what is legal. It's not in line even simply with what Google allows, like their own internal rules essentially. And there has been a lot of effort to use different technological ways to identify trafficking. So there's been some great programs that use AI to identify, for example, YouTube videos that would indicate trafficking or something potentially negative to a woman or child is happening. And this has been very helpful in bringing up these instances as fast as possible to be reviewed by a human. Because I'm just going to go with the YouTube example, YouTube has 400 hours of video uploaded every single day. So that is just, every single hour. So that is just impossible for a human to go through. So being able to apply this AI technology to look through the content of videos is kind of this new frontier where we're hoping we can become more and more efficient. There's always room to do better, of course. So that's just one example of something like that.
And I saw technology as a solution once where it was sort of a mobile phone number that you could dial that was like, I've been taken.
Yeah, there are lots of great apps that aren't necessarily Google, but lots of great apps that use location and contacting authorities and also giving legal advice. Some really great things out there.
There are also a large number of researchers in computer science who are looking at various social problems, like can we identify movement or migration before it happens? Can we use social media to identify early warning indicators in a way that maybe the UN can't? There are people who are looking at what are the types of hashtags and the types of networks that are forming online and to identify pockets of human trafficking. So I think technology is going to help with this problem. And the fact that so many people want to use social media who are in this space for human trafficking, in the long run, as we learn what their tendencies are, we'll be able to find those.
I'll just give one more example. I know that Microsoft has been working for a long time with NCBIC, the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, on hashing technology for facial recognition to try to greatly increase the speed with which they're finding inappropriate content, but also trying to help law enforcement more quickly identify the perpetrators.
Absolutely. I think there's a question here in front.
Hi, this is really interesting. I'm Rachel Rubin. I work at the State Department. I have a question that is relevant to all industries, but specifically to science and technology. With regards to the orchestra test, I mean, I love that study, and I know there's been a lot of others, just women and men, when they read resumes, judge men's resumes more positively. I mean, it's inherent bias for everyone. And I'm just, the artificial technology is promising, but in the short term, what kind of education or awareness or what's the human side of tackling inherent bias? It seems that we cannot wait for kind of all resumes to be viewed by robots, and we can't wait for everyone to wear flats behind a curtain. I just don't see that happening. I mean, and I feel like the awareness with inherent bias is only happening among people who are reading articles about it. I don't actually feel like it's intrinsic in our education system or preparation for management, and so I'm just wondering if you see any possibilities for that going forward.
Just a quick note that I've seen quite a few solutions with augmented reality and virtual reality for hosting meetings, for example, where you're seeing each other's avatars and then communicating. And similarly, that can be used for job interviews as well, where you're interacting with an image of a person that's maybe not the person itself, again with a voice that could be modified for a male and female. And there are some studies you might see as well that in some cases this does reduce gender bias, but in other cases it does not reduce gender bias, where regardless if you don't know the gender of the person you're interviewing, there still we see certain trends. So I'll leave you to judge that, but that could be a promising way where we're interacting with avatars of people, hiding their voice, hiding what they look like. Because in the workforce too, with the hiring managers, they found that very attractive women tend to be penalized. So not average looking or above average looking women, but extremely attractive women are also penalized for being too attractive. And typically the case with female hiring managers, we have this as a case too. So to protect women and men from biases, something like this looks promising.
Where are we with changing sort of merit-based hiring and applications? I'm referring to and potentially some trainings and so forth. I think you wanted to jump in.
Well, so it maybe connects both. I think we have to remember that we're human, okay? And that's going to always be a difference between a computer program if it's programmed properly and us. And I think we should be fine with being human, but maybe the way that this has to be addressed is societally, right? And so we have to convince society that gender, color, all various orientations don't matter, and that it really is looking at it as cleanly as we possibly can, judging a person on their merit. And there's no good answer. I think until we can all agree to do that, which won't happen, it probably needs to be done legally. And we need to find ways to get this more and more into the norms of companies and have it be part of what their expectations are. Like have rule books that say this is how you should look at resumes, this is how you should do different things.
So I hope the any technology that will be helping here progresses as quickly as possible. But I thought it was interesting what you said, that you feel like this is not an issue that's that well known. I feel like I hear about it a lot, but that may just be the world that I occupy. And also I think it's a really interesting issue, so I tend to gravitate towards discussions of it when I can find them. One area where I don't think I've heard anyone talking about that is back in public service. And I was in the previous administration. I was at the White House as President Obama's advisor on intellectual property, and then I was also a trade negotiator for 6 years under President Bush. And in neither one of those, and my own view is most policymakers come to that job wanting to do good things. But every human being has their own unconscious biases, and not necessarily gender biases, although I think that's probably pretty prevalent, but unconscious bias in all sorts of areas. And I thought it would be so interesting to have the White House or some sort of centralized authority having policymakers actively think about what biases they brought to that job and how they could try to strip them away so they could accomplish what I think most of them go into public service to accomplish, which is to try to serve citizens. And that I know of, there has been no discussion of that inside any administration. And I think it's really important.
No, it's interesting, and I think when Obama's first administration, he appointed quite a few women in the cabinet, but they still had to knock to get in the room, the conversations they were supposed to be a part of. Or when he would go out and play basketball, they wouldn't get invited. So they don't talk about it in public service. What they talk about a lot, which we sort of skirt around here in the U.S., is quotas or numbers, to replace political will or to do sanctions and so forth. But in the international sphere, you talk about it a lot more than you do in public service. So I think you're absolutely right.
When I was in graduate school, I was my advisor's first female student, and he had no idea how to deal with me. He would talk about sports, and he wasn't sure that was the right topic, and he would find all these different topics, and then he wasn't sure that was the right topic. And we eventually just got around to the point where I told him the things I was interested in, and he found one that he was interested in, and that was something that was common amongst us. So sometimes you have to go out of your way to make the person comfortable around you. And in a field like mine, where I'm always the minority, for many years I was the only computer science faculty member at Georgetown. And right now I'm the only full professor in computer science that's a female faculty member. I wasn't ever the only faculty member. And so how do you do that? Well, you have to look at what everybody else is interested in. You have to find things that you can share together, because if you can't find things you can share together, those connections just aren't going to form.
You don't create that culture.
I think we've got time for one more question. I'll make the orange right there.
Hi there. My name is Katie Bacon, and I'm in the IT department at the IMF. And I've been in the IT space for 17 years, but my degree was from American and LSE in math and economics, and so I think I have that background, which made this a very logical fit. And when you guys talk about needing to see those examples, my question to you is, what actionable item can I take away? I'm now hitting this great stride in my career right now, and I feel like I'm at a place where I could be a great example to someone, because I've gone through all those struggles, and what can I do after today to help?
This is a great one.
Thank you.
Everyone's smiling.
So you can go out and go to schools, talk about what you do as a computer scientist. Girls don't know what computer scientists do. They don't have any idea. And if they do, they only hear it from one perspective. They don't hear it from your perspective. You can go to, I do a lot of science fair judging. I do a lot of hackathon judging. I do different types of topics that I'm really interested in. Blog about it. Share your thoughts about it. Show that you as a woman in computer science are making a difference, and show the things you're interested in, because there's other women who are interested in that too. They just don't know it yet.
One thing that I really like is joining internal employee resource groups. And when I was in the federal government and now in a private sector company, I've done both of those, and it's been a really great way to meet women. And I've also joined Hispanic leadership group, and so to meet other people that I feel like I can talk to as mentors, and they're great examples. And I don't think I necessarily would have joined just out of pure, wanting to be social, but it's actually wanting to have those mentors and meet them. So I think it's a great place to look for.
And actually there's a group called MentorNet, which is, it's mentors for women in computer science. So that would be another place I would encourage you to look.
Dr. This is a great one to end on. What should people like to take away with walking out of here today, and how to inspire more women?
Do you want a job at WOMAP?
I'm having to be so sad. In fact, my division chief, when I was leaving tonight, she was going to come with me, and she said, "I'm really sad. I'm stuck here, but tell me what I can do." So not only is it about me, I'm very fortunate to have a division chief who's a woman, and our CIO actually at IMF is a woman. And so even though the three of us are in an extreme minority, I do see them in a leadership role, and I know that I'm usually lucky in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is why we build partnerships with different organizations, because it's not bringing them to our foundation, it's also building partnerships and programs within your own institution to encourage more young women, exposing them to the amazing work you do, and enabling them and providing them with the skills to succeed just like you're succeeding.
So, I think what you can do depends on where you are in life. So I think if you're in a position where you can hire, if you're in a position where you can change the culture of your organization or influence change in it, I think you should be actively agitating, either making it happen if you have that authority, or agitating for it to happen if you can help influence the process. So I think that's one thing that's really important. I think role models and mentors in this area are incredibly important. So I think if that's something that you can put out there, I think that's really helpful. And I think if you are not in that position, if you're just starting out in your career, then I would say the two main things that I would offer you is, one, I'm a big believer in false confidence. So I think, I've been, for most of my career, I have been often the only woman in the room, and the way that I've dealt with that is to mostly not think about it. So my first strategy is just obliviousness, like put it out of your mind, especially when you're in the room, because if it becomes distracting to you, that's not good. So walk into the room, don't think about it while you're there, and hold yourself with as much confidence as you can present in that moment. I think many people in life are presenting in a way that they may not feel inside, but I think sometimes that can be harder for women to do. But I think it's incredibly important. So I think putting it out of your mind in the moment and being as confident as you can is very, very important. And that's not just the confidence in that meeting, but it's also confidence to know that whatever you want to happen is going to work out in the long term. There may be some bumps around the road, but I think you have to hold on to the fact that in the long term, this is all going to work out. And I think if you can infuse yourself with that, that will carry you through a lot of situations that are awkward or uncomfortable or worse.
I'm changing my summarizing statements because I was going to use the word sort of action and activism, but I like the word agitate because that suggests sort of a shift as well, which I find kind of interesting. But this is great because we've talked about will, sort of political will, but your own will, which links to your own confidence. The literacy piece I found very interesting, and sort of there's like that sort of technical skill development, that it's the literacy to understand, what's going on around you, and policymakers, so that cuts across, even if you're not doing it, you have to have that literacy to understand what's happening, what are the skill sets that are needed, and so forth. And how technology can benefit women. Women getting at the table, creating these solutions, driving the creativity, but also as users. And people on the other side, people talk about it in the private sector as women are the consumers, but they're also the users of goods and services and part of the culture and society. So I would like to thank our panelists, Victoria, Kachi, Lisa, and Maria. I hope you have a big round of applause for your comments.